Hi, this video is to help you prepare for Unit 3 Lab Practical Exam for 234. And usually in each of the lab practical exams, the vast majority of the exam is labeling. So we're testing you for the anatomy part, which is basically labeling, like what is this and what is that, what is this structure, what is this layer, and so on. But we also use some questions, I call it applied questions, which is basically testing your understanding or your deep understanding of the various parts and various anatomical structures that you're studying in the lab, and also testing your ability to link what you're learning in the lecture to the lab. So I put together some questions that I can think of. Hopefully that will be helpful to you. And we have the urinary system and the reproductive system for Unit 3. So we'll start with the urinary system. The first thing that I can think of is layers of the kidney. What are the layers of the kidney? What's the outermost, followed by what, followed by what? The outermost layer of the kidney is the fibrous capsule or the renal capsule, which is a brown part of the brown outermost layer of the kidney. And this is the actual outermost layer of the kidney. However, in our body, there are two other layers. It's not considered part of the kidney. It's just a cushion and something to stabilize the kidney in place. But it is not part of the kidney, which is the fatty capsule or the fat capsule, followed by the fibrous capsule, or not the fibrous capsule, I mean the fibrous layer or the connective tissue layer. But if we're talking about the kidney itself, the outermost will be the renal capsule or the fibrous capsule or the kidney capsule. That will be followed by, the next layer will be the cortex, the renal cortex, and this will be followed by the renal medulla, and then the innermost will be the renal sinus, which contain all the cavities. You need to remember that the functional unit of the kidney is the nephron, and you also need to know that the nephron is the renal corpuscle plus the tubules. And the tubules are proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Fennel, and distal convoluted tubule. Now, what is the general function? So we're doing anatomy, but what's the general function of each part that we're labeling? Like we're labeling the ureter. What's the function of the ureter? To take the urine from the renal pelvis to the bladder. What's the function of the bladder? The bladder is a temporary reservoir, or to temporarily storage the urine until you evacuate or urinate. So it's temporary storage and urination. Urethra, the function of the urethra is to take the urine to the outside during urination, but in males it serves another function of taking the semen outside. Now the internal and external urethral sphincters, we will talk about those. And the internal sphincter and the external sphincter. The internal is the one that's by the at the very, very beginning of the urethra, which is the very first part that's just emerging out of the bladder, surrounded by part of the muscles of the trousseau muscle of the ureter. This part surrounding the start of the urethra is called internal, and the other one is called external, which is located within the urogenital diaphragm. What is the juxtaglomerular apparatus and what is the function? Juxtaglomerular apparatus is basically the endocrine part of the kidney, and it consists of two parts: juxtaglomerular cells, which are modified cells of the afferent arteriole, plus the macula densa. And the macula densa is a modified part of the distal convoluted tubule when it comes close to the renal corpuscle. So juxtaglomerular apparatus is juxtaglomerular cells plus macula densa. The function is to secrete hormones. What are these hormones? Renin and erythropoietin. What's the difference between male and female urethra? The male urethra is three parts. The first part is called prostatic urethra, which is within the prostate. And the second part is membranous urethra, which is within the membrane, and the membrane is referring to the urogenital diaphragm. And then the third part is within the penis, and we call it penile urethra because it's inside the penis, but because specifically it's within the spongy part of the urethra, or the corpus spongiosum, so we also call it spongy urethra. So the third part is called, which is the longest, it's called penile urethra or spongy urethra. What is the renal lobe? The renal lobe is simply one pyramid, renal pyramid, and the overlying part that's overlying this pyramid from the cortex, the overlying cortex, and a little part of the renal columns on either side. So it's one medulla, the overlying part of the cortex, and part of the renal columns on either side of the medulla. If you put this all together, that will be the renal lobe, and we have something like that in the lab. The blood supply of the kidney is very important, starting from the aorta, going to the renal artery, and then dividing like a tree until the last divisions, which are the afferent arterioles, and then the glomerulus, which is a tuft of capillaries through which the filtrate is going to be filtered out, and then it will go back to the efferent arteriole and then to the other side until you go all the way back to the renal vein, to the inferior vena cava. This is very important. We have in the lab manual a figure that is describing this. We did it in the lecture as well. This is something that you need to know in details. I talked about the internal and external sphincters. Where is it located? I mentioned that. Internal is the parts that's emerging out of the urinary bladder. It's surrounded by a muscle inside the bladder that's called the internal, and this is involuntary. Remember that, internal, involuntary. And then the external is within the urogenital diaphragm, and this will be the voluntary one. Next question would be kidney hilus. What's the kidney hilus? The kidney hilus is the door to the kidney. Things are entering and leaving. What is entering and what is leaving? What's entering is the renal artery and the renal nerve, the renal nerves. What's exiting is the renal vein and the ureter, which is taking the urine out. What's the renal sinus? The renal sinus is the overall cavities in the kidney, which is the most medial part of the kidney, which is all cavities, including the empty cavities and the fat and everything, like cavities, the older calyces, the pelvis, the fat around it, and all of that. We call it the renal sinus, which is basically the cavities that's in the medial part of the kidney. Trigone is a funnel-shaped part inside the urinary bladder, and the boundaries, or the 3 points that make the trigone, are the entrance of the right ureter, the entrance of the left ureter. These are 2 points, and the third one is the exit, or the urethra, the beginning of the urethra. What's the difference between male and female urinary system? Of course, in males there is the prostate. So in females, no prostate. It's one. And the other thing is the length. The male urethra is about 4 times as long as the female urethra, and that explains why females get a lot more urinary tract infection, or cystitis specifically, which is infection of the bladder, urinary bladder, because the male urethra is a lot longer, which is harder for the pathogens to go all the way to the bladder, but it's easy in females since it is too short. This is one. The other thing in females is that the entrance of the urethra is close to the surrounding area, which is the entrance to the vagina, the rectum, and so on. And this area contains a lot of pathogens. So, and the entrance is there, and that explains, those are the 2 reasons explaining why females get more urinary tract infections. What's the epithelial lining of the bladder and what's the muscle inside the bladder? Epithelial lining of the bladder is called transitional epithelium. And transitional epithelium because it makes transitions in the shape to allow the expansion of the bladder. The muscles is called the detrusor muscle. It's a powerful muscle. When it contracts, it ejects out the urine out of the bladder to overcome the resistance of the sphincters, and the urine will leave through the urethra. What's the sequence of the urine leaving the bladder? It goes from the tip of the pyramids, which is called the renal papilla, which contain the papillary ducts. This is the first point that will go to the minor calyx, to the major calyx, to the renal pelvis, to the ureters, to the bladder, and then to the urethra, to the outside. We can also ask you something like this model, is it a male or female? And this will have something simple like prostate. Of course, we will not get a whole male or female model and ask you, what is this? Is it male or female? We would ask you something that contain only like a prostate or something, and the rest is just the urinary system. And just by looking at the prostates under the bladder, you should know that this is a male. So this is for the urinary system. For the reproductive system, we can ask you something like, generally speaking, what's the function of each part that you're labeling? Like, what's the function of the ovaries? What's the function of the testes? Both ovaries and testes produce gonads and hormones. What are the, ovaries and testes are called gonads, but the function is to produce gametes and hormones. What's the gametes? The gametes is the sperms or oocytes, which we call it ova. It's not really, it shouldn't be called ova, it should be called oocyte. But sperm and oocyte, generally speaking, we call them gametes. So what's a male gamete? It's a sperms. What's a female gamete? The oocyte. So production of gametes, sperms in males and oocyte in females. And production of hormones. What are the hormones in males? This is the androgen, most importantly testosterone. And there is a difference between androgen and testosterone. Androgen is, generally speaking, the male hormones. Testosterone is the most abundant or the most common type of hormone. This is which is testosterone. In females, there is estrogen and progestin as well. Progestin is progestation, which prepare for gestation, which is pregnancy. So there is estrogen and progestin, and there are different types of estrogen, like estrone, estradiol, and so on. And when you say, generally speaking, gonads, gonads means ovaries or testes, ovary or testes. So gonads, when I say gonads, are you talking about males or females? Male gonad is testes, female gonads is ovary. And I mentioned for the gametes, male gametes are sperms, female gametes are oocytes. What's ejaculatory duct in males? What's a function and what is it formed from? The ejaculatory duct, if you remember in the lab, it forms from the merging or the union of the vas deferens, which is also called ductus deferens, and the duct of the ejaculator of the seminal vesicle. So seminal vesicle, there is a duct that come out of it that will be joined by the ductus deferens or the vas deferens. They combine together, they merge together to make the ejaculatory duct. So ejaculatory duct is going to take anything that's coming from the ductus deferens and from the seminal vesicle combined, both of them, and open to the prostatic urethra, which is basically the semen. So what's coming from the ductus deferens or the vas deferens, this is the sperms plus some of the fluids that came already. And then the fluids that's coming from the seminal vesicle is also going to join. So at this point, with the ejaculatory duct, you have the semen already. And this will go to the prostatic urethra, from which it will go to the membranous urethra, to the penile urethra, and to the outside during ejaculation. Fallopian tube and vas deferens has different names, and the rule is anytime you see more than one name for any structure, you need to know all the names. The other name for fallopian tubes is the uterine tube or oviduct. Uterine tube, oviduct. For the vas deferens, it's also called ductus deferens. Now we have some structures we have the fetal circulation. So in the fetal circulation, you will see something like foramen ovale, ductus arteriosus, ductus venosus, and these will become fossa ovalis, ligamentum arteriosum, and ligamentum venosum. So when you look at the fetal circulation, you see the first one, which is foramen ovale, that will become fossa ovalis after birth. When you see the ductus arteriosus, this will become ligamentum arteriosum after birth. When you see ductus venosus, and ductus venosus is what take the oxygenated blood from the umbilical veins to the inferior vena cava. But what it will become after birth, it will become ligamentum venosum. What's the difference between oocyte and ova? We usually say the females produce ova every month and so on. It's not really ova, it's called oocytes. So females produce secondary oocyte. And it will not become an ova, you cannot call it an ova, until it's actually fertilized by a sperm. So the difference is secondary oocyte is what's actually produced every month from females, from menarche to menopause, from the start to the end of the ovulation cycles. So what's produced every month, it's the secondary oocyte. Only if the secondary oocyte is fertilized by a sperm, now we call it ova. Now the accessory structures of the male and female, and what's the function of each one of those. Accessory functions of males consist of, number one, the epididymis, and this is for temporary storage, and it also have some secretions, but mainly to temporary storage for the sperms to maturate. Then you have the bulbourethral gland, you have the prostate, you have the seminal vesicle. The bulbourethral gland and the prostate, these secrete secretion that are actually alkaline. Seminal vesicle secrete secretion that's alkaline and also contain fructose to feed the sperms so that they can continue and survive. And it also contain prostaglandin to contract the muscles to help ejaculation. So number one is epididymis, and this is mainly for temporary storage of the sperms, of the spermatozoa until they maturate. Number two, seminal vesicle, it produces fluid, plenty of fluid that is alkaline, that's number one, contain fructose to feed the sperms. Number three, it contain also prostaglandins to stimulate the contraction of the muscles to help ejaculation. Prostate is the only one that secrete kind of acidic secretion, but the semen will be alkaline. And why is it alkaline? It has to be alkaline. Why? To overcome the acidity of the urethra and to overcome the acidity of the vagina as well. The vagina is acidic, the urethra is acidic, so the semen, the overall, should be alkaline to neutralize the acidity so that the sperms survive. Bulbourethral gland is the last one, and the bulbourethral gland also secrete alkaline secretion, but it also lubricates the opening or the gland's penis to help penetration. These are the male accessory organs. The female accessory organs, and these are the paraurethral glands, greater vestibular glands, and lesser vestibular glands. The paraurethral glands secrete into the opening of the urethra. The greater vestibular glands secrete to the opening of the vagina for lubrication, and the lesser secrete to the vestibule. It just secrete mucus secretion for lubrication. Now, the sequence of the sperms and semen production. The sperms are manufactured or synthesized or produced in the seminiferous tubules of the testes. From the seminiferous tubules, they leave through the seminiferous tubules to the straight tubules. So from the seminiferous ducts, this is where the sperms are formed, to the straight tubules, to the ready testes, to the efferent ductules, from which it goes to the head, body, tail of the epididymis, to the vas deferens. So the first part was all in the testes, and then followed by the epididymis, head, body, tail, followed by the vas deferens, which is also called ductus deferens, to the ejaculatory duct, which include the joining of the duct of the seminal vesicles, to the prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, penile urethra, to the outside during ejaculation. And fluids are added as we go. Is this male circumcised or not? What's circumcision? Circumcision is cutting or removing the foreskin or the prepuce, which usually naturally it cover the glans penis, and they retracted or they cut a little piece or that part that's covering the glans penis, and the rationale for that is to eliminate these areas that can hide pathogens and organisms and so on. Anyway, but how to know that this is circumcised or not? If you see the skin of the penis is extending and covering the glans penis, that will be uncircumcised. But if you see the glans penis obvious and clear and not covered by skin coming from the penis, that will be circumcised. So how the spermatic cord? What's the spermatic cord? Spermatic cord is basically the vas deferens or ductus deferens, surrounded by testicular arteries, testicular veins. Testicular veins, when you see it in the form of plexus, you call it Pampini-form plexus of veins. So vas deferens, arteries, testicular arteries, veins, nerves, lymphatics, all of that surrounded by muscle that's called the cremaster or cremasteric muscle, and all of this together will be called the spermatic cord. How this spermatic cord enter to the abdomen or to the abdominopelvic cavity? It enters through an opening in the males that's called the inguinal canal. Umbilical cord contents. What are the contents of the umbilical cord? It contains umbilical arteries and umbilical vein, 2 arteries and 1 vein. Which is oxygenated and which is deoxygenated? The umbilical vein, 1 vein, is oxygenated, which is the second exception for the artery being red. It's not in this case. Remember that all arteries are red except pulmonary arteries and umbilical arteries and veins. This will be the opposite. So umbilical arteries, the 2 arteries, umbilical arteries, this is actually deoxygenated, and the umbilical vein is the one that's oxygenated. Ductus venosus, I mentioned that before. Ductus venosus is what take the oxygenated blood from the umbilical vein that's coming from the mom to the umbilical cord and deliver it to the inferior vena cava. The muscle that's surrounding the testes and the muscle that's lining the scrotum, which is the skin surrounding the testes, what are these 2 muscles? These 2 muscles are simply, when they contract, they push the testes up. The optimal temperature for the testes to produce sperms and hormones and everything is about 1 degree less than the body, and the core body temperature is a little bit higher than that. So if it is hot, these muscles are going to relax so that the testes go away from the body, move a little bit away from the body that's hot or that's warm, and if it is cold, it will contract and push it up closer to the body that's warm so that it keep it in an optimal temperature, which is 1 degree less than the core body temperature, so that it will be the optimal temperature for production of sperms and hormones. The testes are actually produced in the pelvic cavity near the kidney, in the abdominal pelvic cavity near the kidney, and then it will descend down until at the end it settle down in the scrotum, within the scrotum. So it's not formed in the scrotum; it's formed up near the kidney, and then it descends. If something happened and it does not descend, it will stay near the kidney or somewhere in the route between the kidney or not the kidney, under the kidney or the original position and the final destination, which is the scrotum. If it doesn't go all the way down this way, it's called undescended testis. So the testis did not descend to the final location, which is the scrotum, which is the optimal part for optimal temperature. So if that doesn't happen for any reason, the scrotum will be empty, either 1 or 2, but most of the time it's 1. If that's the case, the testis will not be in the optimal temperature, and this is called undescended testis, cryptorchidism. Both of them are the same. And the problem with that is if the temperature, the core temperature inside the body, if the testis stayed inside, and the core temperature is higher, it's not good for the production of the sperm, so it can lead to infertility, but it can also lead to cancer of the testes. Last thing here is corpora cavernosa and corpus spongiosum. As we know, corpora cavernosa, the penis contains 2 corpora cavernosa and 1 corpus spongiosum. The root of the corpus of the corpora cavernosa, the 2, is called crus, C-R-U-S, while the root of the corpus spongiosum is called the bulb. The corpus spongiosum consists of the bulb, which is the root that attach the corpus spongiosum to the bone of the pelvis, and the tissue inside is also corpus spongiosum. And the glans penis itself is an extension from the corpus spongiosum. So the 3 parts, the root, which is the bulb, the corpus spongiosum itself, and the glans, all of them are from the same tissue, which is the corpus spongiosum, extension from the corpus spongiosum containing the same tissue. The crus is an extension from the corpus of the corpora cavernosa. And the corpus spongiosum, which is one only, is the one that contains the urethra, and this is where the name spongy urethra came from. We know that it's spongy urethra or penile urethra. Both of them are okay. So why did you call it spongy urethra? Because corpus spongiosum is the one that contains the penile urethra or the spongy urethra.